Episode 631. Brandon arrives to aid in the search. Everyone stared at her as she spoke. Bessy wanted to be behind the scenes. Hence, there was no longer any information about her on the web. Also, few people in Devil City knew of her. But everyone in the capital's circle knew about her because of her cool aura. Different circles had different levels of integration. Even though Johnny knew about Bessy, he had never seen her in person. Hence, half the people sitting at the table recognized Bessy, while the other half didn't. This was because they weren't caught up in the things on the web, nor were they part of the capital's inner circle. The person holding the laptop definitely recognized her. He froze when he saw Bessy. Clarissa saw the look on his face and immediately knew what had happened. She took over the laptop from him and passed it to Bessy. She then looked at Johnny and introduced her. "Bessy, this is my friend." She then introduced him. "This is my brother-in-law." Johnny answered, "Nice to meet you, Miss Miller." Bessy looked up and answered while typing on the laptop. "Nice to meet you too." She was as cold as how everyone described her. The secretary sat next to Johnny and didn't dare to make a sound. "Have a look. This was left by his grandfather," Clarissa said to Bessy. Bessy looked at the web page. This was created ages ago. The design showed that it was from another generation. She glanced at it and fished out a thumb drive from her pocket. She then inserted it into the computer. She had written quite a few scripts that were in tremendous demand in the hacking community. This was because they were really convenient to use and helped save time. This terminal differed from the version available everywhere else. She scanned through it and realized that she had never encountered it before. Bessy's arrival silenced the hall. Nobody dared to make a sound. Bessy stopped typing after she was done with all the servers in the terminals. "What's the matter?" Clarissa asked when she saw that she had stopped. Everyone looked in her direction. Bessy tapped the table with her index finger. The sound echoed through the hall. "This seems to belong to the Hacker Alliance. I can't solve this in such a brief span of time," Bessy said as she pointed at the monitor. No wonder they couldn't break through after so long. The Hacker Alliance? Both Johnny and Clarissa were shocked. She stared at Bessy and asked, "Are you sure? Was it possible for Bessy to fail? Or was she wrong all along for thinking that B was her?" B was really great at their craft, Clarissa thought as she looked at Bessy. Meanwhile, Bessy just looked at her in silence. The owner of the laptop frowned. Johnny and the gang looked towards him. The secretary realized what was wrong and asked, "Does it mean that it is very difficult?" They didn't know much about the Hacker Alliance. Only the owner of the laptop understood the significance behind it. He knew quite a bit about the Hacker Alliance. Frowning, he said, "They're the top hackers from around the world. These hackers only follow the instructions of their chairman, or else they would have disrupted the world's economy in a matter of minutes. The person that created this terminal must have been a part of the Hacker Alliance. Their proprietary technology is really hard to crack." Everyone was shocked by what he said. Johnny stood up as he didn't expect such a matter to involve the legendary Hacker Alliance. "Clarissa, let me think of a solution," Johnny said as he looked at Clarissa. Clarissa shook her hands at him and continued, "Bessy, could you ask your uncle?" Bessy looked at her and remained silent. Marvin poured Bessy a cup of water and explained, "Miss Hale, Mr. Hall is no longer in that position. It will be useless to look for him." Everyone knew that Brandon was the former chairman of the Hacker Alliance. Clarissa asked, "Yes, he's no longer in that position, but I remember that he wanted you as his successor. If you asked for their help, I bet they would be more than happy to help." The current chairman of the Hacker Alliance could only dream of building a friendly relationship with Bessy and Michael. "I'll ask around." Bessy looked away and took a sip of water. She then took a picture of the symbol and sent it to Brandon. This was a weird terminal. It was a product from decades ago using technology that was centuries ahead. Bessy couldn't get the access rights. She only managed to collect the first and second sets of data. She was still formulating a plan as she wasn't sure of the terminal's capabilities. As she thought, Brandon FaceTimed her. It was the afternoon in Austria, and Brandon was in a garden. Bessy greeted him politely. Clarissa stood up and greeted him. "Mr. Hall."
"Oh, all of you are here,"
Brandon said. Normally, he would have chatted with Clarissa, but this time he dived straight into the topic.
"Bessy, where did you get this picture?"
Bessy answered. "I got it from a file in the cloud server from a couple of decades ago. I saw this symbol when I tried to break into the terminal and didn't dare to continue." She was worried that the data would self-destruct if she successfully broke the code. Brandon kept quiet for a moment. He then stood up and asked Clarence to get the fastest ticket to the capital. Clarence looked at Brandon and said, "You'll have to ask Mr. Clark for help." Bessy frowned and answered, "I'll help you with that. Just head to the airport first."
"All right."
Brandon grabbed his coat and left. Before he left, he said,
"Bessy, this might be from your grandma."
Bessy's grandma was the matriarch of the Miller family. She was Brandon's sister that had gone missing a couple of decades ago. Bessy hung up. Carmen, Miller matriarch. This information gave Bessy a headache. She planned to leave it to Michael to worry about all of it. She then looked at the laptop's owner and asked, "May I return your laptop tomorrow?" The owner was shocked. "All right." Bessy got up, and Marvin packed up the laptop. He then left along with her. "One day," Bessy said as she put on her cap. Clarissa understood what she meant. She would only need 1 day to crack the problem. She tidied up, smiled, and said, "Don't go overboard with your investigation. Leave the rest to us." The rest of them looked at her and asked, "Why?" Clarissa followed Bessy out. As they approached the exit, she turned back to look at Johnny seriously and said, "My brother-in-law will be taking over. Don't interfere with him." She also realized that if it was related to the Miller family and even Zeke knew about it, it was impossible that Michael didn't know about it. The rest of them kept silent till Clarissa could no longer be seen from the gates. After 3 minutes, someone asked, "Johnny, is Miss Hale serious? Will Carmen be all right? Her friend looks kind of weird even though she seems familiar." Carmen was being kept in the base. Johnny didn't answer. However, the secretary answered, "Why would she not be familiar? She's the oldest daughter of the Miller family, the one that brought the World Poker Tour to its knees." The person didn't answer. He understood what it meant. The Clark and Miller families went hand in hand. The oldest daughter from the Miller family and the third son of the Clark family went hand in hand as well. Everyone finally knew who the brother-in-law was. Everyone asked Johnny, "Johnny, how are you related to Clarissa?" No one had heard of such a person from the Hale family in the capital. The next morning, "I've managed to unlock the terminal. Now we just need to make sure that the folder doesn't self-destruct." Clarissa returned the laptop to Carmen's subordinate. She saw that Johnny was deep in thought and asked, "Do you have a business car?" Johnny answered, "Yes." He was close to Carmen. Hence, even though he was rescued by Clarissa, he still had the power to request a car. "All right," Clarissa replied. "We need to fetch someone from the airport." She texted Brandon and told him not to get a ride. Johnny then got the secretary to get the business car. When they left, they saw Johnny's father. Johnny didn't tell everyone that he was out. Hence, it had been peaceful, like the calm before the storm. Johnny's father was shocked to see him and asked, "Why are you out?" Johnny looked at him and didn't reply. He then asked the secretary to drive off. Johnny's father looked at the car and remained motionless. The traffic wasn't bad at this time, allowing them to reach the airport in half an hour. Along the way, even though the secretary and Johnny were curious, they didn't dare to ask Clarissa who they were picking up. They couldn't understand what Clarissa was doing since Carmen was arrested. They waited at the arrival hall for a couple of minutes before Clarissa saw the people they were awaiting. She was the photographer for Bessy's wedding, and she produced a special episode about Brandon. Hence, she was close to him. She waved at him and said, "Mr. Hall, we're over here." Brandon didn't have any luggage with him. Clarence was following along, carrying a backpack. Clarence greeted Clarissa when he saw her. "Miss Hale, let's not stand on ceremony," Clarissa said as she introduced Johnny to Brandon. They then walked towards the parking lot. "Where's Tucker?"
Tucker is in school. He's a talented child,"
Brandon replied smilingly, even though everyone could tell that he was worried. Clarissa was worried as well. Thus, she immediately left after receiving the confirmation from Bessy. 20 minutes later, the car arrived at the Miller family's house. The guard let them through after seeing Clarissa and Brandon. Zeke had finished changing after returning home for a while. He approached Clarissa and Brandon when he saw them and said,
"Bessy is upstairs. Mr. Hall, follow me." "All right."
Brandon couldn't wait. This was the only lead he had of his long-lost sister. He went up immediately. Zeke followed slowly behind them. Only Hudson and Carmen's secretary remained downstairs.
"Sit here. They will take a while. I'm Film God's manager, Hudson."
Hudson introduced himself. They were good at socializing and got to know each other well in a couple of minutes. Hudson consoled the secretary as he saw the worried look on his face.
"Don't worry, Carmen is fine."
Clarissa, Brandon, and Michael weren't only representing themselves, they were also representing 3 powerful organizations. If the 3 organizations joined forces, even Kenneth would be scared. Furthermore, they had Bessy. Carmen's secretary nodded and changed the topic.
"Who was the person that we picked up just now? Are there more people entering the capital?"
The Grant family was the newly added family that entered the capital. They managed to surpass some of the older families in a couple of years. He understood that there was no Hall family in the capital.
"Are you talking about Mr. Hall?"
Hudson asked.
"Marvin mentioned before that Mr. Hall was the chairman of the Hacker Alliance previously. He's from a talented family. However, he's only teaching his nephew now, and he plans to teach his grandnephew in the future. Are you all right?"
Episode 632. May our country and people remain strong and prosperous. Bessy and the rest remained upstairs. When Brandon arrived, Bessy was still at the computer. She let him look at it. Bessy stood up and gave the seat to Brandon, saying, "Have a look at this." Brandon was shocked by the familiar old web page. After getting over it, he sat down and took a long look at the web page. He typed some commands into the computer before saying,
"It belongs to the Hacker Alliance, but it doesn't use our codes."
Brandon didn't know how his sister got these codes. Before he got on the plane, Bessy sent him some source code, and he was working on it on the way here.
"Hand it to me. It will just take a couple of days,"
Brandon said as he opened the editor.
"This source code isn't the same as what we are familiar with.
When he entered some comments, he found out that the source codes were almost solved. He stopped in his tracks. Clarence was about to take out the thumb drive when he saw Brandon was shocked. He asked,
"Is there anything wrong?"
Brandon looked at him before looking at the others and asking,
"Have you guys solved the source code?"
Michael answered,
"Yes."
Brandon asked,
"Who solved it?"
Everyone looked at Bessy. Brandon realized what had happened and was bewildered. He knew that Bessy was great in software architecture and development. He even wanted to get her to train with Tucker. He withdrew his gaze expressionlessly, opened the activation code, connected it with the code that Bessy wrote, and asked,
"Are we only left with the self-destruct folder?"
Bessy answered, "Yes, we can start from this." Bessy was on it the entire night. Brandon was on it as well. They were the best in the hacking scene, and the self-destructing folder was easy to identify. Bessy's codes shocked Brandon. The Miller family's study was huge. While the two of them solved the code, Michael discussed Carmen with Johnny.
"Sit down."
Michael gestured to the sofa. Johnny had never met him before. He had never interacted with any of these famous people. He sat down carefully and greeted.
"Mr. Clark."
Michael greeted him as well. He then handed Johnny a folder and slowly said,
"Have a look. This is all the data we have on Carmen."
Compared to the cautious Carmen, Johnny immediately looked at the documents. Michael waited as he looked at the documents. He leaned on the sofa and glanced at Bessy. After 10 minutes, Johnny was done with the documents and looked up. Michael looked back at him. He smiled and explained.
"I never knew that Carmen was Clarissa's sister. They almost foiled my plans with her partner, but coincidentally, it will be easier with her around. They're almost done with the terminal anyway. When the results are out, I'll hand you a document to hand to her."
As he spoke, he looked at Bessy again. When Michael checked on Carmen, he didn't check on Clarissa. As her data was in 129 with a top-secret classification, his subordinates didn't have much data on her. Hence, they focused their effort on Carmen, Johnny, and the Harris family. Who would have thought that Clarissa was actually the center of the Hale family? Michael then said everything he knew, overwhelming Johnny. He only remembered one thing. Why was Michael addressing his sister? Clarissa. Johnny looked at him, speechless. Wasn't he Clarissa's brother-in-law? Bessy and Brandon worked on it for the entire morning before breaking into the terminal. When they got in, they saw a top-secret classified document. The symbol of the Capitol's laboratory could be seen on it. Michael stood behind Bessy and said,
"It must be the non-disclosure agreement between the older Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Too many people were unrecognized in the incident that year. Now, we found her documents."
8 p.m. In the base. Carmen was finally released from her cell. She was confused by everything that happened, but remained calm. Even though she was locked up for a few days, she was still hopeful. She had thought that the guards were going to interrogate her, but she saw Clarissa, Johnny, and her secretary when she was brought to the gate. As this was a guarded base, Carmen couldn't bring her mother and father in. Just as Carmen was in a daze, the guard saluted Clarissa and said,
"I've brought the person to you."
"Thank you." Clarissa nodded at him. Carmen had a ton of questions, but she couldn't ask them at the base. It was only when she got in the car that she asked Clarissa and Johnny, "What's going on? Did she just get out like that? She wasn't even judged?" "It's a long story. I'm afraid that it might overwhelm you," the secretary said as he looked at Clarissa. Would anyone believe who he met? Johnny nodded and agreed. "It's a complex matter. Let me slowly tell you." Would you believe that Michael addressed Clarissa as sister? They reached the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and everyone went up to visit Clarissa's grandmother. Clarissa remained in the car, fiddling with the photos on her phone. Her photo received comments and likes. She looked at them nonchalantly, but a comment caught her attention. "Congrats." Grandma Hale had just woken up and was waiting for her son and daughter-in-law to update her on Carmen. Clarissa's uncle's wife was there as well, consoling her.
"Mom, don't worry. Your son-in-law is on it. Carmen will be fine. She'll be back in a couple of days."
Clarissa's father said. "Is that true? Are you lying to me?" Grandma Hale looked at him and asked.
Of course. Why would I lie? You can ask them.
Clarissa's father said. But they all knew that Carmen would take a while to get out. The Hale family would have to rely on Clarissa from now on. Carmen took care of her. Hence, the uncle's wife was trying to investigate what had happened on the matter. However, the investigation bureau didn't warn her at all. Clarissa's mother kept silent as she poured a drink for the three of them. The atmosphere was tense in the room. Suddenly, a knock came from the door.
Who is it?
Clarissa's mother put down the drink and wanted to get to the door. But the door opened. 3 people came in. Carmen, Johnny, and the secretary entered. Everyone in the ward was shocked by their sudden appearance.
Carmen, you're out?
Her father jumped from his seat and exclaimed, looking revitalized.
Are you all right? Look at you, you've lost weight.
Carmen was shocked that her uncle's wife was there as well. Dad, Mom, let my secretary explain, Carmen said.
It was because of Clarissa,
the secretary said.
Because of Clarissa's friends. One helped to take care of Carmen, one settled the investigation bureau, and one solved the puzzle. Carmen was released using a document approved by Mr. Grant. It was all because of Clarissa that Carmen was released.
Otherwise, it would have taken at least a month before she could be released. Clarissa's father listened to the story. He thought of Clarissa and suddenly became emotional. He looked at the entrance and asked,
God bless. What about Clarissa? Where is she?
Do you not know where your daughter is? The secretary thought as he looked at Carmen's father and replied,
Clarissa must have gone to thank her friends.
Carmen didn't return home after visiting her grandmother. She went downstairs to look for Clarissa as she wanted to ask her to help look for the person that judged her case. Clarissa leaned on the seat as she looked at Carmen. She made a call to Patrick and asked, What do you want? I want to visit Grandpa, Carmen answered. The call got through and Patrick spoke.
Miss Clark, the plane is ready. I've set up a cloud trading platform as well. You guys can come to the Clark family school.
Clarissa looked at Carmen and said, Follow me. She then drove to the Clark family. The Clark family was located on a street guarded by soldiers. Even if they hadn't come here before, both Carmen and Clarissa knew who lived here. Carmen was scared when she saw the Clark name on the door, but Clarissa, the secretary, and Johnny were familiar with this place. Carmen followed along. The guard greeted Clarissa.
Miss Hale, Mr. Patrick has been waiting for you.
All right, Clarissa said as she signaled for them to follow along. Patrick's private jet was ready. He greeted Carmen and the rest before speaking to Clarissa. The 5 kids of the Clark family were famous in the capital. Their reputation preceded them. Clarissa and Patrick continued their discussion until they got on the plane. Carmen and Johnny glanced at each other. Was this the sister she knew? At 1 a.m., at a secret base in Fairfields Mountain, they were shocked by the base's size.
Let's head in.
Patrick passed a document to the guard. The guard saw the logo and let them in. The corridor was made of titanium. It was well lit and there was some unknown material on the wall. They headed down. After walking for a while, they could no longer see the entrance. Then, they saw a door. It wasn't decorated, but a button was next to it. Patrick solemnly bowed in front of the box before carefully taking out a notepad from it. It was really old, and the pages were already oxidized. He handed it to Carmen and said,
What you want to know is inside.
She wasn't sure, but it was hard for Carmen to hold the notebook. She only opened it after a while. It seemed to belong to the base. There was a formula at the beginning. Then, she saw writing. I'm Claudius Wilson, one of the researchers in the First Research Institute.
In the year P7, the Institute discovered signs of extraterrestrial life. I was in charge of leading the other researchers. We have tested everything from nuclear to mechanical properties. We have discovered that V7 contained elements with lethal radioactive properties. This extraterrestrial civilization will cause great destruction. Hence, I stopped the study and got out of the capital with the help of the head of the Miller family and General Hale. Now, I'm deployed at the Comet site where we created Fairfield Base. Hopefully, our efforts will be effective. I've absorbed too much radiation and don't have long to live. If I cannot spend the rest of my days in the physics laboratory, then allow me to stop this disaster with everyone at this base. I hope that our country and our people will remain strong and prosperous as well.
Carmen stopped, shocked by what she read. She then continued reading. There were other notes written. I'm Liam Miller. We were in charge of sending Mr. Wilson out of the capital. My wife came in contact with V7 and died because of it. I've requested to stay with Mr. Wilson. When I die, please bury me with my wife. I'm Mason Song, one of the researchers. I've volunteered to join Fairfield's town base along with Mr. Wilson. I'm Damon York from the 5th District. I've volunteered to join Fairfield Base with Mr. Wilson. I'm Julian Hale. I will try my best to protect you guys. Mr. Wilson asked me to seal the base. They will perfect the system before the oxygen runs out. The rebels found out about this base. The base's system is turned off, and I've set off the explosives. I pray that your efforts won't go to waste. The last page was newly written. To Mr. Wilson, Mr. Miller, Mr. Song, Mr. York, and Mr. Hale. I'm Michael Clark from the 1st District, and this is my report. The V7 projects are complete. We have arrested all the rebels. The radiation never spread, and the 3 big research institutes are now in Austria. Fairfield Base is now regarded as a top priority location. We thank you for your selfless contributions. They will be recorded in our history books. May our country and people remain strong and prosperous. Regards, my highest respect. Carmen caused a big stir in the investigation bureau, but no one would have expected that she would be released in a week. She even returned to her position the next day. It spread everywhere. Even the Hale family knew about it. Grandma Hale made a swift recovery because of Carmen's return and the help of the doctors. She was discharged on the 3rd day. Mrs. Wright and the uncle's wife supported the Hale family and came to congratulate her. The other relatives that didn't help them didn't dare to come. It must be because Carmen's subordinates had great connections. Mrs. Wright didn't know what had happened and said, Wesley's father was impressed by Carmen's abilities. If her son had loved Carmen, she wouldn't have to back out of the marriage under the Fay family's request. Grandma Hale didn't correct her, but the uncle's wife spoke. Mrs. Wright, that's where you're wrong. It wasn't because of Carmen. Madame was shocked and asked, It wasn't because of Carmen? Clarissa's uncle's wife answered, That's right. It was because of Clarissa. She has powerful friends, and one of them is from the Clark family. Episode 632. May our country and people remain strong and prosperous. Bessy and the rest remained upstairs. When Brandon arrived, Bessy was still at the computer. She let him look at it. Bessy stood up and gave the seat to Brandon, saying, Have a look at this. Brandon was shocked by the familiar old web page. After getting over it, he sat down and took a long look at the web page. He typed some commands into the computer before saying, It belongs to the Hacker Alliance, but it doesn't use our codes. Brandon didn't know how his sister got these codes. Before he got on the plane, Bessy sent him some source code, and he was working on it on the way here. Hand it to me. It will just take a couple of days, Brandon said as he opened the editor.
This source code isn't the same as what we are familiar with.
When he entered some comments, he found out that the source codes were almost solved. He stopped in his tracks. Clarence was about to take out the thumb drive when he saw Brandon was shocked. He asked,
"Is there anything wrong?"
Brandon looked at him before looking at the others and asking,
"Have you guys solved the source code?"
Michael answered,
"Yes."
Brandon asked,
"Who solved it?"
Everyone looked at Bessy. Brandon realized what had happened and was bewildered. He knew that Bessy was great in software architecture and development. He even wanted to get her to train with Tucker. He withdrew his gaze expressionlessly, opened the activation code, connected it with the code that Bessy wrote, and asked,
"Are we only left with the self-destruct folder?"
Bessy answered, "Yes, we can start from this." Bessy was on it the entire night. Brandon was on it as well. They were the best in the hacking scene, and the self-destructing folder was easy to identify. Bessy's codes shocked Brandon. The Miller family's study was huge. While the two of them solved the code, Michael discussed Carmen with Johnny.
"Sit down."
Michael gestured to the sofa. Johnny had never met him before. He had never interacted with any of these famous people. He sat down carefully and greeted,
"Mr. Clark."
Michael greeted him as well. He then handed Johnny a folder and slowly said,
"Have a look. This is all the data we have on Carmen."
Compared to the cautious Carmen, Johnny immediately looked at the documents. Michael waited as he looked at the documents. He leaned on the sofa and glanced at Bessy. After 10 minutes, Johnny was done with the documents and looked up. Michael looked back at him. He smiled and explained,
"I never knew that Carmen was Clarissa's sister. They almost foiled my plans with her partner, but coincidentally, it will be easier with her around. They're almost done with the terminal anyway. When the results are out, I'll hand you a document to hand to her."
As he spoke, he looked at Bessy again. When Michael checked on Carmen, he didn't check on Clarissa. As her data was in 129 with a top-secret classification, his subordinates didn't have much data on her. Hence, they focused their effort on Carmen, Johnny, and the Harris family. Who would have thought that Clarissa was actually the center of the Hale family? Michael then said everything he knew, overwhelming Johnny. He only remembered one thing. Why was Michael addressing his sister? Clarissa. Johnny looked at him, speechless. Wasn't he Clarissa's brother-in-law? Bessy and Brandon worked on it for the entire morning before breaking into the terminal. When they got in, they saw a top-secret classified document. The symbol of the Capitol's laboratory could be seen on it. Michael stood behind Bessy and said,
"It must be the non-disclosure agreement between the older Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Too many people were unrecognized in the incident that year. Now, we found her documents."
8 p.m. In the base. Carmen was finally released from her cell. She was confused by everything that happened, but remained calm. Even though she was locked up for a few days, she was still hopeful. She had thought that the guards were going to interrogate her, but she saw Clarissa, Johnny, and her secretary when she was brought to the gate. As this was a guarded base, Carmen couldn't bring her mother and father in. Just as Carmen was in a daze, the guard saluted Clarissa and said,
"I've brought the person to you."
"Thank you." Clarissa nodded at him. Carmen had a ton of questions, but she couldn't ask them at the base. It was only when she got in the car that she asked Clarissa and Johnny, "What's going on? Did she just get out like that? She wasn't even judged?" "It's a long story. I'm afraid that it might overwhelm you," the secretary said as he looked at Clarissa. "Would anyone believe who he met?" Johnny nodded and agreed. "It's a complex matter. Let me slowly tell you. Would you believe that Michael addressed Clarissa as sister? They reached the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and everyone went up to visit Clarissa's grandmother. Clarissa remained in the car, fiddling with the photos on her phone. Her photo received comments and likes. She looked at them nonchalantly, but a comment caught her attention. Congrats. Grandma Hale had just woken up and was waiting for her son and daughter-in-law to update her on Carmen. Clarissa's uncle's wife was there as well, consoling her.
Mom, don't worry. Your son-in-law is on it. Carmen will be fine. She'll be back in a couple of days.
Clarissa's father said, Is that true? Are you lying to me? Grandma Hale looked at him and asked,
Of course. Why would I lie? You can ask them.
Clarissa's father said, but they all knew that Carmen would take a while to get out. The Hale family would have to rely on Clarissa from now on. Carmen took care of her. Hence, the uncle's wife was trying to investigate what had happened on the matter. However, the investigation bureau didn't warn her at all. Clarissa's mother kept silent as she poured a drink for the three of them. The atmosphere was tense in the room. Suddenly, a knock came from the door.
Who is it?
Clarissa's mother put down the drink and wanted to get to the door. But the door opened. 3 people came in. Carmen, Johnny, and the secretary entered. Everyone in the ward was shocked by their sudden appearance.
Carmen, you're out?
Her father jumped from his seat and exclaimed, looking revitalized.
Are you all right? Look at you, you've lost weight.
Carmen was shocked that her uncle's wife was there as well. Dad, Mom, let my secretary explain. Carmen said.
It was because of Clarissa,
the secretary said.
Because of Clarissa's friends. One helped to take care of Carmen, one settled the investigation bureau, and one solved the puzzle. Carmen was released using a document approved by Mr. Grant. It was all because of Clarissa that Carmen was released.
Otherwise, it would have taken at least a month before she could be released. Clarissa's father listened to the story. He thought of Clarissa and suddenly became emotional. He looked at the entrance and asked,
God bless. What about Clarissa? Where is she?
Do you not know where your daughter is? The secretary thought as he looked at Carmen's father and replied,
Clarissa must have gone to thank her friends.
Carmen didn't return home after visiting her grandmother. She went downstairs to look for Clarissa as she wanted to ask her to help look for the person that judged her case. Clarissa leaned on the seat as she looked at Carmen. She made a call to Patrick and asked, What do you want? I want to visit Grandpa. Carmen answered. The call got through and Patrick spoke.
Miss Clark, the plane is ready. I've set up a cloud trading platform as well. You guys can come to the Clark family school.
Clarissa looked at Carmen and said, Follow me. She then drove to the Clark family. The Clark family was located on a street guarded by soldiers. Even if they hadn't come here before, both Carmen and Clarissa knew who lived here. Carmen was scared when she saw the Clark name on the door, but Clarissa, the secretary, and Johnny were familiar with this place. Carmen followed along. The guard greeted Clarissa.
Miss Hale, Mr. Patrick has been waiting for you.
All right, Clarissa said as she signaled for them to follow along. Patrick's private jet was ready. He greeted Carmen and the rest before speaking to Clarissa. The 5 kids of the Clark family were famous in the capital. Their reputation preceded them. Clarissa and Patrick continued their discussion until they got on the plane. Carmen and Johnny glanced at each other. Was this the sister she knew? At 1 a.m., at a secret base in Fairfields Mountain, they were shocked by the base's size.
Let's head in.
Patrick passed a document to the guard. The guard saw the logo and let them in. The corridor was made of titanium. It was well lit and there was some unknown material on the wall. They headed down. After walking for a while, they could no longer see the entrance. Then, They saw a door. It wasn't decorated, but a button was next to it. Patrick solemnly bowed in front of the box before carefully taking out a notepad from it. It was really old, and the pages were already oxidized. He handed it to Carmen and said,
"What you want to know is inside."
She wasn't sure, but it was hard for Carmen to hold the notebook. She only opened it after a while. It seemed to belong to the base. There was a formula at the beginning. Then, she saw writing.
"I'm Claudius Wilson, one of the researchers in the first research institute. In the year P7, the institute discovered signs of extraterrestrial life. I was in charge of leading the other researchers. We have tested everything from nuclear to mechanical properties. We have discovered that V7 contained elements with lethal radioactive properties. This extraterrestrial civilization will cause great destruction. Hence, I stopped the study and got out of the capital with the help of the head of the Miller family and General Hale. Now, I'm deployed at the Comet site where we created Fairfield Base. Hopefully, our efforts will be effective. I've absorbed too much radiation and don't have long to live. If I cannot spend the rest of my days in the physics laboratory, then allow me to stop this disaster with everyone at this base. I hope that our country and our people will remain strong and prosperous as well."
Carmen stopped, shocked by what she read. She then continued reading. There were other notes written. "I'm Liam Miller. We were in charge of sending Mr. Wilson out of the capital. My wife came in contact with V7 and died because of it. I've requested to stay with Mr. Wilson. When I die, please bury me with my wife.
I'm Mason Song, one of the researchers. I've volunteered to join Fairfield's town base along with Mr. Wilson. I'm Damon York from the 5th District. I've volunteered to join Fairfield Base with Mr. Wilson. I'm Julian Hale. I will try my best to protect you guys. Mr. Wilson asked me to seal the base. They will perfect the system before the oxygen runs out. The rebels found out about this base. The base's system is turned off, and I've set off the explosives. I pray that your efforts won't go to waste." The last page was newly written. To Mr. Wilson, Mr. Miller, Mr. Song, Mr. York, and Mr. Hale. I'm Michael Clark from the 1st District, and this is my report. The V7 projects are complete. We have arrested all the rebels. The radiation never spread, and the 3 big research institutes are now in Austria. Fairfield Base is now regarded as a top priority location. We thank you for your selfless contributions. They will be recorded in our history books. May our country and people remain strong and prosperous. Regards, my highest respect. Carmen caused a big stir in the investigation bureau, but no one would have expected that she would be released in a week. She even returned to her position the next day. It spread everywhere. Even the Hale family knew about it. Grandma Hale made a swift recovery because of Carmen's return and the help of the doctors. She was discharged on the 3rd day. Mrs. Wright and the uncle's wife supported the Hale family and came to congratulate her. The other relatives that didn't help them didn't dare to come. It must be because Carmen's subordinates had great connections. Mrs. Wright didn't know what had happened and said, Wesley's father was impressed by Carmen's abilities. If her son had loved Carmen, she wouldn't have to back out of the marriage under the Fay family's request. Grandma Hale didn't correct her, but the uncle's wife spoke. Mrs. Wright, that's where you're wrong. It wasn't because of Carmen. Madame was shocked and asked, It wasn't because of Carmen? Clarissa's uncle's wife answered, That's right. It was because of Clarissa. She has powerful friends, and one of them is from the Clark family. Episode 633, An Explosion of Hot News. The Hale family didn't even know as much about Clarissa as compared to the secretary and Johnny.
Clarissa's parents wouldn't understand some of the complex and classified matters. Carmen pondered for a while before deciding to tell them some of it. Even though she had only scratched the surface, it still shocked Mrs. Wright and the uncle's wife. There were many cliques in the capital, but the inner circle was still the one that everyone wished to be a part of. After hearing what she said, Mrs. Wright thought that she was joking and asked, Clarissa? Carmen was the most outstanding of the Hale family. She had climbed to such a prominent position, even though she had no connections. Clarissa was capable as well, but she was nowhere near Carmen. That was the reason Mrs. Wright asked Wesley to go overseas. However, she was told that Carmen was saved by Clarissa? Mrs. Wright was bewildered and utterly confused. Clarissa's grandmother and aunt and uncle had no reason to lie to her. She zoned out at the end and returned home in a daze after half an hour. Wesley and his assistant were holding some documents and heading down. "Wesley, give me a moment," Mrs. Wright called out to him. Wesley was still holding the documents. He turned towards her and said, "Yes?" "Regarding dating," Mrs. Wright said. Wesley looked at her and smiled. He then rejected her. "It's all right." "About Clarissa." Madame was still confused by what went on. "Why did you agree to go overseas previously?" Initially, she thought Wesley would make an enormous mess if she had asked him to go overseas, but he did it without resistance. "There was no reason," Wesley replied nonchalantly. "I simply wasn't qualified. Oh, please stop asking me about any girls in my life in the future. I don't want to get married." Wesley then left after bidding his mother goodbye. Mrs. Wright sat on the sofa, still shocked by what had happened today. At the Fay Corporation, Louis was sitting at his desk and holding the document that Sherry had given him. Everything written by Clarissa in that document was too superficial. He couldn't understand why Sherry couldn't get more information about Clarissa. As he was deep in thought, someone knocked on the door. The secretary brought Olivia in. Louis immediately kept the documents and asked, "Are you done picking the dress for tonight?" There was a banquet tonight and Olivia was his date. She replied, "Yes, I'm done." "That's great," Louis said as he nodded. They continued their discussion for a while before Olivia left. When she closed the door, Louis was still looking at the drawer in a daze. Olivia pouted and left. She knew what was in the drawer. It was Clarissa's information. "Chairman Fay invited you to the banquet. Why aren't you happy?" Her manager waited for her at the lift. He joked after seeing the unhappy look on her face. Olivia entered the lift with her manager. When the lift closed, she then spoke. He was looking at documents about his ex-wife. The manager was shocked. "I was under the impression that he never loved his wife. Aren't they divorced?" Olivia shook her head tiredly. She had realized that Louis wasn't paying attention to her recently. He would buy some magazines that only the older generation would read. Olivia discovered that the magazines would contain some articles about Clarissa. She felt that something was amiss. Her manager turned serious after what Olivia said. She understood what this meant in the industry. She then replied, "It's all right. Leave it up to me." The next day, there was a trending topic on Twitter. Olivia, mistress. Olivia was selected as one of the characters in the realm of gods, and it led her to become famous. She was even exposed to having a meal with Film God. Hence, this made her even more famous. This was especially because her image as a school tyrant was well liked by everyone. She was very intelligent. Her college final exam results were better than most in the industry. With the support of a rich person, this helped her get a lot of fans. This trending topic attracted everyone's attention. That topic was started by one of the famous gossip accounts on Twitter.
The CEO of the Fay Corporation, Louis Fay, was secretly married for years. His wife was Clarissa Hale from New Media. A photo surfaced recently showing Louis entering a hotel with Olivia. They were behaving intimately in the photo. A clear photo of Louis and Olivia was attached in the post as well. Olivia was famous nationally. Louis was the rising star in the capital who had a ton of money while being extremely handsome, but he never had any affairs. There were rumors that he was with Olivia before, but it was denied by the media company. Back then, the netizens were just looking at the saga for fun. But it was different now. Louis was married. With this photo, didn't it show that Olivia was a mistress? Her personal branding was ruined and everyone was cursing her. The netizens rushed to Clarissa to console her. They then continued to curse Louis and Olivia. At the same time, in Louis's office, he was trying to contact Clarissa. This news caused a huge stir. The stock price of the Fay Corporation fell. If this matter wasn't resolved, it wouldn't be great for either of them. The first person that came to his mind was Clarissa. However, Clarissa wasn't even aware of what was happening. She was busy helping out the installation of a new Hall of Fame in a museum recently. She picked up the phone and said impatiently, "I'm busy. Don't bother me." She immediately hung up. Louis was shocked. He looked at Olivia, who came over the moment the news came out, and said, "It probably isn't her." How could it not be her? Who else could it be? Have you seen how her fans grew in number? Olivia mocked. She shut her eyes and said, "She's your ex-wife. You handle it." She then left before he could reply. Louis leaned back on his chair in silence after she left. His secretary carefully asked, "Chairman Fay, regarding this." Louis frowned. It was true that Olivia wouldn't do this to herself. He immediately fished out their divorce certificate and uploaded a photo of it on his Twitter. Louis Fay, we divorced 2 months ago. Photo attached. The photo was of their divorce certificate. Olivia's team tried to steer the conversation away after the post went live. They weren't married. How was Olivia a mistress? "I'm just a passerby, but I would like to voice my opinion. Clarissa and Louis's marriage was a political one. I've seen her profile. She's nothing compared to Olivia. Louis was lucky to divorce her and be with Olivia." "It must be because she wanted more out of the marriage. She must have done this to get into the industry. Look at the number of followers she gained." Photos attached. "She must be crazy. Does she think that anyone can just enter the industry like that?" "Olivia is such a poor soul. She has been bullied for so long." "Louis has done something right. This reporter can't match up to him." At the same time, a new post surfaced. Latest news, their divorce is true. The reporter was seen at the set of The Realm of Gods in Austria a month ago looking for Film God. Photo attached. Film God treated everyone on set to breakfast a couple of times. Everyone knows that Olivia has a sensitive stomach. This post caused an uproar. "Damn, you are crazy to go after Film God." "I knew it. How could someone that Film God approves of be a bad person?" "All the best to Olivia." At New Media Clarissa Hale, "No wonder you divorced Louis. You were going after Film God all along. You should look at yourself." At New Media Clarissa Hale, "How many surgeries have you gone through for that face?" "I'll be evacuating Olivia out of this mess. Bye." Film God, calm down. I bet Miss Hale isn't aware of this. Let me ask the public relations team to clear it up," Hudson said as he saw the cold look on Zeke's face. You needed to have traffic to be successful. The manager was aware of who stood to gain the most from this. He even knew what was going on between Zeke and Clarissa. He even asked the Clark family for help when Clarissa's grandmother was sick. But it shouldn't be hard to settle this matter. Didn't one of the netizens say that Clarissa wanted to enter the industry? But the question was,
Did she need to? Zeke lit up a cigarette and stared quietly at Hudson. He then looked at Twitter and scrolled to Lewis's post. He wasn't sure if he should be angry or happy. Damn. Zeke threw his phone onto the desk. Hudson noticed that he had calmed down and left to ask the public relations team for help. The public relations team of their studio wasn't used much by Zeke. Bessy and Clarissa used it more. Zeke finished the cigarette and then picked up his phone again. There was another news item. Latest news. The truth behind their divorce. He tapped onto the tagline. The more he read, the colder the look on his face became. He could tell that it was because of Olivia's team. It was common in the industry. You would have to rely on someone regardless of whether the reports about them were factually true. The netizens wouldn't know the truth, and it wasn't the first time someone had wanted to use him to be famous. He calmed down after he read these. He then commented calmly, "Damn you all to hell." He then returned to his main page and uploaded 2 photos. One of them was a chat with Bessy a month ago. Clarissa loves Chinese food. Help me to take care of her. The second photo was taken at the exhibition. It was a simple shot. The first place in the exhibition. Photographer, Hale. Bessy's name was saved as Bessy. His fans wouldn't forget who Bessy was. Zeke's profile was swarmed after the post. His studio's Twitter was swarmed as well in less than 2 minutes. At the public relations office, the manager was trying to take a photo of Clarissa's resume to upload, but his phone suddenly rang. Hudson continued to instruct the team while fishing out his phone. He was so shocked that he needed to check what he saw. The public relations staff saw that he was shocked and asked him what was going on. Hudson looked at him and answered, "The news exploded." He must have forgotten what Zeke was really like. He was the man capable of breaking into the industry even though Gabriel tried to stop him. He was a true descendant of the Miller family. Sierra, who messed with Bessy previously, was still used as an example in the industry. He must have toned down after finding his niece and nephew. He couldn't care much about the newer generations using him to become famous nowadays. The media must have forgotten what Zeke was really like. Zeke was about to show them that he was still superior. Episode 634. Clarissa, you're finally here.
Is the script done?
Hudson asked as he sat on the chair. The public relations staff showed the laptop to him and answered,
Yes, it is.
Bessy was given quite a comprehensive set of information. All the public relations staff had to do was summarize it.
Post it,
Hudson said. He wanted to settle the incident in another way, but since Film God had moved, he might as well add to what he started. Zeke didn't like to post much on social media. His Twitter only contained updates about Bessy and her friends. The rest were advertisements. He didn't even post selfies. His comment on a gossip post was regarded as a fake comment by most of the netizens. The rest of the netizens wouldn't know who Zeke was. This was because Zeke had the reputation of being a gentle and well-mannered idol. Hence, how could he say something like that? But they were shocked when they clicked on the commenter's profile. I'm so disappointed in you. Please stop, Film God. She's not worth it. Yes, liked by 8,012 people. It's obvious that she just wanted to be famous. Film God, are you being controlled by her? Damn, is this real? Someone commented after confirming that it was Film God that left the comment. This is such a rare occasion. I love it. The comments changed. The netizens first headed to Film God's Twitter and then to his studio's Twitter. After they were done, they left a long comment. Damn, how hard is she trying to be famous? She's the only person God Miller addresses as a sister. Why would she still want to be famous? No one could answer the last part. Olivia was growing in popularity in the industry, but she still didn't have enough fans, and her influence was comparable to a regular person. If you were to compare her to Bessy, Olivia wouldn't be anywhere near her. As for her low IQ, no one could retort to that as well. Nico was enough to prove everything. Olivia was only famous because she was pretty. Bessy was both smart and pretty. Hence, even Olivia's fans couldn't help her now. However, this wasn't the end. After that, Hudson's post was published. It was a simple post. It was just the result slip from a school's examination. The students from that school were shocked.
Damn, she was the legendary student that the principal spoke about?
So she's the student that made me feel like a dumbass?
It's nothing at all. She just rejected the Vienna University of Music and Performing Arts invitation twice.
She finished her studies in only 1 year as well.
She was a physics genius, yet she was the top scorer for the humanities subject.
Clarissa's Twitter had focused on writing news articles. Hence, Twitter verified her as a reporter from new media. It was only after Hudson's post that everyone found out that she was the legendary student from Ohio State University.
Do you remember Director Simpson? She was his only student, and he even had a movie prepared for her. She would have been famous ages ago if she wanted.
Now, even those who wanted to accuse her of cozying up to someone powerful or using Bessy couldn't do so. How could they insult someone who was selected by the Vienna University of Music and Performing Arts twice? How could they insult someone that Bessy addressed as older sister? How dare they? They wouldn't dare to. At Zeke's studio, he didn't look at the reactions after releasing his post. He opened up Twitter and struggled to decide whether to send a message. He then looked out of the window. With drooping eyebrows, he leaned against the window. His fingers curled around a cigarette, and he breathed out in despair as the smoke rose from it. Hudson came in holding his phone as he wanted to discuss what happened on Twitter. But after seeing how Film God was at the moment, he stopped. Hudson knew what he was thinking of after being Zeke's manager for a long time. Hudson coughed to attract his attention as he sat down on the sofa.
Miss Hale seems to be faded with us.
Zeke looked at him silently as he smoked the cigarette. Hudson pretended that everything was fine and continued.
She follows you everywhere you go. You searched for her for quite a while.
Zeke then stood up and put out the cigarette on the ashtray. Hudson felt as though he was trying to snuff him out instead. He then continued.
She must be the one. She was the one at the bar in Austria too. If it wasn't her, how would you have the highest clearance for 129? But we rarely saw her after that.
The first time Hudson met Clarissa was at Bessy's wedding. Back then, Clarissa didn't like to chat. She was focused on her camera and didn't allow anyone to tell her otherwise. She talked very little and didn't look cold, but since even Marvin didn't dare to mess with her, Hudson and Robert vaguely realized that she was so powerful that even the 5 guys from the Clark family didn't dare to mess with her. Hudson was close by during the hospital incident. He realized that Clarissa looked familiar as well. After that, the bar incident at Austria happened. It was rare for Zeke to be so close to a female, except on set. Hudson was even involved in the Hale family's affairs recently. After speaking to Marvin and witnessing Zeke's strange behavior, Hudson realized that Clarissa was the lady from the bar and the reporter from a few years ago. They were all the same person. Film God must have recognized her. However, Hudson didn't understand. All 3 of them had different identities. He wouldn't have realized it if it wasn't for Zeke's strange behavior. However, they hadn't seen much of Clarissa since they came to Austria. Hudson looked up and wanted to continue. Zeke interrupted him and said,
"Get out."
Hudson was speechless. As he headed out, he said,
Oh right, we're filming tomorrow. It's a closed filming, so do prepare for it.
Zeke kept silent. There was a tribute next to the museum. Clarissa and Raven were filming it. Although Clarissa looked well, Raven was very quiet. There were 62 statues and 223 names there, ranging from old scientific researchers to unknown soldiers. Most of them didn't have a proper grave. Raven finished the final shots and handed the camera to Clarissa. She then placed a white chrysanthemum in front of the 100-people monument. It was only when they were almost back at the publishing house that Raven could calm herself down. When they returned, it was almost time to knock off. There was a tense atmosphere in the office. Raven could see that Chairman Stone was following a middle-aged lady. President? Raven was shocked and stuttered. The president of the publishing house was a powerful woman. Chairman Stone was her nephew. She had been around for a long time, but she didn't come often, and Raven had only seen her on the news.
Can you handle it now that Chairman Soup has left?
The president asked Chairman Stone. She wasn't like a typical gentle woman, as she had slightly sharp and thick eyebrows and wore a formal dress. She had a no-nonsense look. She was idolized by everyone. Even Chairman Stone looked up to her. Chairman Stone replied smilingly,
I can manage.
He led the president around the publishing house and then saw Raven and Clarissa at the door. Chairman Stone was shocked. This was because of the huge mess online. The new media's official account had crashed because of the traffic. Considering the special treatment Chairman Soup gave her, all the employees of the publishing house admired Clarissa despite what happened on Twitter. Chairman Stone felt that Clarissa had a lot of secrets. But since the president was here, Chairman Stone kept to himself.
Let's head to the office,
he said to the president. The president was surprised, but she nodded. The president sat on the sofa in the office and said,
Don't care about me. Go settle your things.
Chairman Stone knew what the president was like and asked for Clarissa. He wanted to promote her to chief editor. It had only been less than a month since he knew about Clarissa. However, Clarissa rejected the promotion. It's all right, Chairman Stone. I don't think I can do it. If there's nothing else, I'll go write more stories. Clarissa then turned away. The president suddenly stood up and said,
Clarissa?
Clarissa stopped and greeted her.
Ma'am, I came here after I found out what happened on Twitter. I'm glad that you finally overcame it.
The president walked towards her and hugged her. Clarissa looked up after the hug and replied smilingly, Thank you.
If you want to, you can let me meet him,
the president said as she patted Clarissa's shoulder. She then said some other stuff before letting her leave. Through the conversation, Chairman Stone and the secretary kept silent. It was only when Clarissa left that Chairman Stone realized what had happened. He looked at the president and asked,
And is that your cousin's ex-girlfriend from high school?
The president said smilingly,
I'm glad she overcame it. Don't try to make her the chief editor. Chairman Soup has tried to ask her at least a dozen times before already. She rejected it every time.
The president then said something to Chairman Stone before leaving happily. Chairman Stone sent her to the lift and went to smoke a cigarette. He had an awesome cousin. Even though he lived in his shadow his whole life, he respected him and was only jealous of his talents. However, his cousin died in an accident in the 3rd year of high school. It was only then that he found out that his cousin had a girlfriend that took physics. They were the perfect couple and everyone's nightmare. After his cousin's death, he heard that the girl switched to humanities. In the evening, Clarissa carried a bag filled with beer to the cemetery in the countryside. She sat in front of one of the tombs and started drinking. She was a great drinker. It was only when she was done with half of the beer that she started to get drunk. She leaned next to a small tree and spoke softly. "Joseph, this is my last time visiting you." Her phone rang on the floor, but she didn't hear it. Early the next morning, Clarissa cleared up the cans of beer. Then, she picked up the phone. She wanted to skip work today as something was going on at 129, but she saw 3 missed calls. They were numbers from the capital. The numbers weren't saved, but she knew who it was. She returned the call, but the person's phone was turned off. She then walked down and threw the bag into the bin. She texted Bessy. She replied within a few minutes. "You're heading to a military base for a documentary. You cannot communicate with the outside and have to use the base's phone." Clarissa saw the text and replied, "All right." She then flagged a cab. Jared called her when she got on.
"Do you remember what day it is today?"
Clarissa put on her headphones and answered, "Yes, I'm going to lie to the students."
"How is that lying? You're encouraging them,"
Jared said as he continued to drink his coffee.
"I'm waiting for you. The last round of selection starts at 9.
Clarissa arrived at 129 at 8:30 a.m. There weren't many students that made it to this round. Only 5 would be selected. Clarissa had gotten some food on the way. She was finishing up her meal when she reached the venue. The staff member waiting for her was elated when she arrived. He was holding onto her black jacket. Before Clarissa spoke, Lewis was shocked by her presence and asked,
"Why are you here?"
Clarissa didn't respond to him, but passed an empty milk packet to the staff member. The staff member took it and handed the jacket to her. He then exclaimed,
"Clarissa, you're finally here."
Episode 635, Morning Birds Finale. Clarissa responded to the young man and walked inside. "Is everyone here?"
"All those who took part in the final round of testing are here waiting for you."
The man helped open the door for her and let her in. He closed the door after she entered, and their voices became softer. Outside, sitting in the hallway, the group of people taking the test was stunned for 1 to 2 minutes. They then returned to their senses and exchanged glances.
"Jasper just called that woman morning boss."
The buzz-cut man was still staring at the door excitedly.
Could she be?
Jasper was a senior member who had handed Clarissa her clothes and was an executor on 129's front page. For him to be so respectful, this woman must be an important figure in 129. The only people higher than Jasper were the 5 veterans. As for the 5 veterans, they knew of one woman called Morning Bird. Jasper had called her Morning Boss. This year, Morning Bird had been used on the billboard for 129. They were seriously shocked now. Everyone there turned to Lewis, their eyes glistening brightly, and the excitement in their voices was hard to hide.
"Lewis, do you know Morning Bird?"
Lewis was still in a trance and couldn't even hear what they were saying. He just stared at the door's direction. Clarissa walked through the scene at 129. Recently, 129 had been unstable in all aspects. Jared had also wanted Clarissa to shock the scene and make people in Evanston understand her weight. This entire test lasted for 2 hours, and Clarissa would have stayed throughout had it been in the past. However, she had other things to attend today. Within an hour, she left in advance. Lewis was waiting for her at the gate, staring at her with sharp eyes. When she came out, he directly grabbed her wrist.
"Clarissa, have you always been lying to me?"
In the past few years of their marriage, Lewis hadn't understood much about her and only knew that she was a reporter. He had always planned to divorce her eventually. Unexpectedly, only after the divorce did Lewis slowly realize that he seemed to have never really known her. Northwestern Memorial Hospital and Austria had really made him feel differently about this divorced wife in his heart. When dealing with Olivia, he had obviously dealt with her perfunctorily. But Olivia had passed 129's first assessment because of a freak combination of factors. This had made Lewis more convinced, and he had re-examined her and given her a lot of resources. Who knew that he would bump into Clarissa at 129? Too many people in Evanston revered 129. Lewis didn't understand if he liked Sherry and Olivia because of their personalities or because he admired their journey on the detective road. However, he discovered today that the wife whom he had never taken a second look at before was actually one of the 5 veterans of 129. The moment he realized this, he was so surprised he felt like he had seen a ghost. The 5 veterans of 129 were the founders, and other than the mysterious lone wolf, Morningbird was the most well-known member. Morningbird's achievements had long been promoted to the altar in 129. Tens of millions of people were curious about the true identity of the 129-5 veterans. Lewis would have never imagined that he actually knew one of the elders, and that Morningbird was actually once his wife. Clarissa shook off his hand and looked up with strikingly cold eyes. "Mr. Fay, please conduct yourself with dignity." She couldn't beat Bessy, but Lewis was a different story. "Morning, boss. What's the matter?" Not far away, a few staff members hurried out. The people in 129 were already familiar with the 5 veterans, including Bessy. Upon seeing Clarissa being blocked by someone, they hurried over and stared fiercely at Lewis. "It's okay." Clarissa lowered her eyes and lightly patted down her sleeves before walking away. "Tell Jared that I'm driving his car." She was headed to the airport. "Okay." The staff members stood at the door, looking at her back in admiration. After she left, they looked back intently. Turning around and walking back, they noticed that Lewis was still standing frozen in place and patted his shoulders. "Brother, you're a family member of an interviewer, right? Don't even think about Morning Boss. She can defeat 100 of you alone." Mountain City. At the base headquarters. A factual documentary was being filmed here, which would be screened during the film festival. All actors would be paid for 5 films, and those who could enter were old opera bones, directors, or the most famous old artists in America. Because this place was an important national spot, general communicators couldn't be used. The entire base signal was shielded, and only special equipment could be used. People outside didn't know what was going on inside, and people inside didn't know the movements outside. They were almost isolated from the outside world. Such days would continue for a few months. However, those present were all old drama bones who could endure hardships, as well as those powerful but unpopular movie stars. After Zeke finished filming a scene, he took the towel from his manager and wiped off the sweat on his face. He sat down next to the director. "How is it? My mouth has run dry." During the intermission, the director sighed and glanced at Zeke. "It's okay." Zeke had experienced all kinds of suffering, so this didn't bother him at all. He looked down at his phone with no signal. Then he looked up again and surveyed the scene. There were many onlookers around. His eyes rested on a figure carrying a black bag, and he suddenly paused. Holding his phone, he directly stood up and said without looking back, "Director, help me move my scene back. I have to take a leave today." He left and rushed towards the surrounding staff. The director was at a loss. Zeke was the most dedicated actor among all of those that he knew, and this was his first time asking for a leave on site. The manager watched as Zeke pushed past the crowd and was also taken aback for a while. Then, he smiled and sighed. "Director, Miss Miller is here." This time, the Miller family had a high probability of double happiness. After finally fixing the incident on Twitter, it might be time for Film God's turn. The half-sky marriage was being fixated on in the entertainment industry. How could it be worthy of the 2 words, film god, without a hot search? Episode 636. The Birth of the New Prince in Evanston. At the beginning of the new year, Zeke went home this time with one more person. Michael and Bessy had spent the past few years at the Miller family's house during the new year. When he saw the person Zeke had brought back, he couldn't help but hold Bessy and say, "You're too low in seniority." Boom. While he was talking, a dazzling color burst outside the window. Jack and a few children from the Miller family's branch were setting off fireworks. Michael's other hand pressed against her belly, and he could feel a slight movement inside. There was a subtle feeling in his heart.
Jack just stated that he can set off fireworks while holding the baby next year.
Outside the window, the fireworks were still on display. Bessy's due date was approaching. After the new year, the atmosphere of the entire Evanston differed from before. The important people all rushed back one by one. The Clark and White families' staff were miserable and found Rosemary to complain. Besides them, even the few large laboratories and 2 universities' atmospheres were different. It was now that Leonard came to Evanston for Bessy to sign a pile of papers. Upon seeing her, Leonard was taken aback.
How many months?
Although she was about to give birth, Bessy was still very thin and only looked about 5 or 6 months pregnant. She picked up a cup and replied slowly. Upon hearing the due date, Leonard became even more anxious and didn't rush her for the manuscripts, nor urge her to sign anymore.
You're about to give birth. Why are you still running around? Why didn't you tell me?
Bessy looked up at him and said slowly,
"It's okay.
Don't be so nervous." Leonard glanced at Patrick standing beside her. This month, Michael had quit most of the things he was working on and had almost always been by Bessy's side. Occasionally, when he couldn't get out of the laboratory, he would ask Patrick to accompany her. As for Marvin, Mary's father had already asked for him a few months ago. He had happily gone to plant flowers. Since Patrick couldn't always follow Bessy, Michael was already training Sergeant Baldwin. Marvin was resentful of this. During the New Year's school's competition a few days ago, he especially shamelessly called Patrick and Sergeant Baldwin to compete with him. Obviously, neither of them was enough to fight him. Sergeant Baldwin was now one of the most popular men in the Clark family, and countless people admired him. Now that he was even beaten up by Marvin, the eyes of the younger members of the Clark family looked at Marvin as if he was a god. Bessy and Leonard mainly discussed the comic copyright. Several film and television companies had the same intention. They finished talking and eating an hour later. Bessy got up slowly and headed out with Leonard. Patrick walked 3 steps behind them, always paying attention to her state. After stepping out of the room, Bessy suddenly stopped.
"What's the matter?"
Leonard nervously asked. Bessy held the doorframe with her hand, with nary a change in expression. She turned her head and said calmly to Patrick, "Go to the hospital." The people around her were all extremely nervous this week. Although there were still 4 days before the due date, the hospital was already making preparations in advance. After hearing this, Patrick immediately made 2 calls, even though his hands were trembling a little. His first call was to the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, telling them to prepare the delivery room. His second call was to Michael. They arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Marvin arrived early. It was the first time Patrick saw the always elegant and graceful Michael with fine sweat on his forehead. He didn't even have time to change into a coat and was still wearing his white lab overalls. Bessy was picked up by him, and she couldn't help but ask, "Why are you more scared than me?" Michael looked down silently at her, his eyes blank. Bessy entered the delivery room, and Michael also followed quickly. Before he walked in, he was stopped by Rosemary, who had also heard the news. He looked up, frowning tightly. "I'm just afraid that you'll scare the other doctors and nurses," Rosemary said helplessly. "Tell me, in the whole hospital, who else other than Mr. Brown will be at ease under your scrutiny?" Michael was now the devil of the medical school. These doctors in the delivery room rarely saw him. If he sat next to Bessy, how stressed would these doctors and nurses be? Bessy herself already brought an invisible pressure. Upon hearing this, Michael stopped at the door and promised not to disturb the people inside. More and more people gathered in the corridor. Zeke had also rushed over after recording the show. Already aware that Bessy was the oldest daughter of the Miller family, Leonard wasn't surprised to see Zeke and was just cautious instead. Soon, Gerald also arrived. Leonard paused upon seeing the person he had often seen on the national news recently. A few minutes later, a group of people got up and down the elevator. It was Samuel and Robert's group, who weren't familiar with Leonard. However, Leonard was still familiar with the owner of the largest entertainment company in America, Robert, and paused for a moment upon seeing him. Then, Rosemary also rushed over with 2 seniors from the physics laboratory. These people weren't seen often on TV and were only well known in the industry. After a minute, the elevator door opened and 2 more people came in. Leonard didn't know these people and finally heaved a sigh of relief. At that time, Marvin respectfully greeted both of them. "Mr. Cree, Mr. Kenneth." So many people came, and it was the first time Marvin was so respectful. Not only Marvin, but Zeke, Rosemary, Robert, and the others were all very polite to them. Leonard was speechless. A crowd was waiting outside the delivery room. An hour later, the door of the delivery room opened. A nurse came out under everyone's stare. Bessy was first pushed to a ward not far away. Then, the doctor followed with a baby. Bessy was immediately surrounded by a bunch of people. Another group of people went to the doctor holding the baby. Zeke and Andrea followed Bessy into the ward. "Bessy, how do you feel?" Crouching at the head of the bed, Michael grasped Bessy's hand and gently kissed her fingers. Feeling the sweat on his palm, Bessy looked up at him and cheered herself up. "I'm okay." "Is it a boy or a girl?" After seeing that she was okay, Zeke turned his gaze to Michael. Michael paused and suddenly remembered about the child. Holding Bessy's hand, he calmly and somewhat confidently answered him. "I don't know." Those who studied medicine naturally knew how painful it was to give birth to a child. When Michael saw Bessy coming out of the delivery room, his heart was no longer with the child, and he didn't even know the gender of his baby. Zeke was speechless. Wow, he was utterly convinced. Outside the door, the doctor held the child and finally entered the ward under the entanglement of a group of people. He placed the baby gently beside Bessy. The group of people dared to bother the doctor, but no one dared to act presumptuously in front of Bessy and Michael. Leonard came in with a group of people and didn't dare to fight with the group of big bosses looking at the baby. Beside him, even Samuel and the others didn't dare to intrude either. Everyone had finally seen Bessy's child now. It was a boy, but his skin was too red and wrinkled. He wasn't ugly, but he was definitely not good-looking either. So ugly. Bessy glanced at the baby a little distastefully, and then closed her eyes and fell asleep. The originally obedient baby seemed to hear her and cried out loud. Bessy frowned slightly. Michael glanced at the baby and said lightly,
"Take him to the next door ward."
Everyone in the ward was speechless. At the same time, a popular Twitter post suddenly emerged.
"I went to a hospital for an examination today and was almost blinded by the cars at the entrance. I don't have much to say, but here's a picture."
This blogger posted 9 pictures. There was a luxury car in each picture. They were all very arrogant cars. One of them was stopped due to a violation of regulations and was even posted a fine. The rich are collectively sick? Doesn't it feel like a car team of a club? Is there a live stream at the side?
Which car team has 8 global limited edition luxury cars?
Which car team dares to hang such license plates? My God, what's going on? Can someone broadcast it?
Speaking of which, Evanston is indeed different from before. There are 12 cars in total, and the worst car among them is the black Volkswagen. Why do I feel like this Volkswagen is still the center among these luxury cars?
Brother, take a good look at the Volkswagen's license plate number. Hell. During the heated discussion, a divine reply popped out. A netizen who claimed to be unimportant replied to it.
"Stop guessing. Today, the most distinguished crown prince was just born in Evanston. These people are all the important people who came to see him."
Episode 637. Aiden Clark.
"Have you chosen a name?"
The child was transferred to the next door. The number of people surrounding Bessy suddenly decreased. Only Andrea and Michael stayed behind. The doctor stood at the door holding a notebook and asked cautiously, reaching out to cover Bessy's quilt. Michael tilted his head and turned to the doctor.
"Eric Clark."
Eric Clark? The doctor had yet to react. Was it such a joking matter?
"No."
Rosemary came back from next door and tried her best to object.
"This name isn't good enough. Film God, do you have any ideas?"
Zeke put his hand against the corner of his lip thoughtfully. Then he cleared his throat and leaned against the door.
"Why don't we call him Aiden Clark?"
When Bessy had just gotten pregnant, he had thought of 10 names. Now that Rosemary asked, he casually suggested one of them. A boy would be called Aiden, while a girl would be called Zara. Rosemary had only casually asked Film God and didn't expect him to really be prepared. She couldn't help but swallow back the name she was about to suggest and said instead,
"Aiden Clark sounds much better than Eric Clark. Bro, what do you think?"
Upon hearing this, Michael glanced at her and pondered slightly. He didn't explain to Rosemary that Eric Clark was in honor of Mr. White, Bessy's mentor. He didn't object to the name chosen by Film God and drawled,
"Then we'll call him Aiden."
Aiden Clark's name was finally determined. The next day, Brandon, Tucker, Mr. Grint, and the others also hurried back by plane. Too many important people came to see the baby, and people came and went in the ward from time to time. Afterward, even when he stopped crying, Michael didn't let anyone carry him back. Everyone knew Bessy was afraid of noise and didn't dare to harass her casually. Michael originally wanted to hire a nanny for the child, but Andrea, Marvin, Christopher, and everyone else had mercilessly refused. When Brandon and Tucker came in, Marvin and Alexander were studying the baby bottle.
"How is it? Is it 70 degrees yet?"
Standing beside Marvin, Alexander held a formula measuring spoon, looking at the milk bottle Marvin was holding like it was his enemy. Bessy's appetite had not been very good during pregnancy, and although Michael had thought of different ways to make her eat without restricting her freedom, her appetite still hadn't gotten better. Her whole person was reduced. Now that the baby was born, it could only drink formula. Marvin shook his head.
"It's about 80 degrees. I can't report it accurately."
He held the milk bottle seriously, and the other hand was placed on the formula can. The whole formula came in an original iron box with a white sticky note on it, with the word brown written on it. Daniel was still in the World Health Organization and had sent someone to hurriedly deliver 2 cans of formula.
"Let me."
Giant Crocodile took over the milk bottle and said,
"It's 79 degrees. Wait 2 more minutes."
After watching the child with Tucker, Brandon turned to Marvin, Giant Crocodile, and asked Christopher,
"What are they doing?" "They're preparing milk for the baby,"
said Christopher.
"Mrs. Smith said that the best temperature is 70 degrees.
Staring at Giant Crocodile actually getting along with Alexander and Marvin, Brandon was speechless for a while. Then he just chuckled and shook his head. He immediately turned his attention to the child sleeping on the bed.
"What's his name?"
Brandon stayed beside the boy's bed, watching him lying on it without opening his eyes nor crying. Looking at the cold and aloof child, he was so happy that he didn't know where to put his hands and feet. Christopher gave up his position to Brandon.
"Aiden."
Although Tucker's face was emotionless, he was looking at the small child with fascination and joy.
"It's 70 degrees.
At the table not far away, Giant Crocodile finally spoke. Alexander carefully put the formula in. After mixing it in, they walked over to the bed. Marvin took the bottle and thought about how Andrea had picked the baby up while feeding him. However, this baby was too weak, and Marvin was afraid of hurting him if he was a little careless. He didn't dare to pick up the baby and just put the pacifier carefully into the child's mouth. It had been more than a day since the baby's birth. The baby opened his eyes slightly, showing off dark, pure eyes like obsidian. He refused to eat. Perhaps there were too many people around him, for he even cried out. Hearing his cry, Brandon, Giant Crocodile, Marvin, and everyone else panicked. For a moment, the ward was in turmoil. Christopher quickly went to find Andrea. Mr. Grint looked at the baby's cool eyes that resembled Bessy's and said softly,
"Quickly stop crying. Grandpa will play the violin for you, okay?"
Xander stiffly caressed the baby's head, but perhaps because the baby's head was still too fragile, his hand was always 1 centimeter away.
"Don't cry. Uncle will screw off Augustus's head for you to play with tomorrow."
Augusta was Xander's enemy. Brandon was too distressed by the baby crying and softly coaxed,
"Baby, don't cry. Your great uncle will buy you the entire Hacker Alliance."
Alexander glanced at him and was not to be outdone.
"Please don't cry. I'll let Marvin perform for you."
Andrea came in under Christopher's request and listened to these people's big words. The men inside the room all saw her entering. They stopped talking and made way for her. The crying baby's face had turned red, although his face had already been wrinkly red. Andrea skillfully picked up the baby boy and held the feeding bottle in the other hand. The baby boy instantly stopped crying. Tucker stood aside and watched carefully. Andrea was no stranger to Brandon, Xander, Alexander, and the others' big words. After all, Clarissa and Jared had said similar things yesterday. Kenneth had been even more overboard than Xander, and Andrea had given reminders in the beginning, but in the end, she decided to turn a deaf ear. After all, this was the child who would inherit Michael and Bessy's double business, so there wasn't a need to worry more. The birth of the child injected new vitality into the 4 major families, and even the major research institutes. He was the apple of the eye of all the important people in Evanston. Instead of returning to Austria, Brandon settled directly in Michael's manor. Andrea was worried about Michael and Bessy and stayed with them to take care of the little boy too. Zeke didn't stay behind, but every day before going to work, he would make a detour to see the baby boy. This little boy had a bad habit and liked being held by others, or he would cry and be aggrieved. This delighted everyone in the house. Brandon, Tucker, Marvin, and the others all learned how to hug the baby boy and walked around in the garden with him in their arms. The servants were just decorations, following Jared, Marvin, and Alexander around. They wanted to wait for their arms to tire before holding the baby, but it never happened. The little boy was almost 1 month old, and because of the close attention from several people, his nutrition had kept up and his appetite was better. He had pale skin, long, curly eyelashes, and very beautiful black eyes. He was precisely like a porcelain doll. Everyone adored him and couldn't get their hands off of him. After all, who wouldn't like such a good-looking baby? A middle-aged aunt looked at Slag Dragon holding the baby in his arms and said regretfully to the person beside her, "Why isn't he tired at all? Aren't his arms sore? How was he able to hold the baby for so long? And Marvin also hugged him all night." "Exactly," a servant beside her nodded in approval. Until the next day, Marvin performed an unarmed cracking of bricks to the baby, who was being held by Brandon in the garden. Waiting for a chance to hold the baby, the aunt was speechless. Since this day, they stopped discussing why these people never seemed to get tired. Soon, the baby boy would be 1 month old. The Clark and Miller families held a big, joyous celebration. Rosemary and the others were on Michael's side at night, discussing the celebration with Bessy. Bessy's body was in good condition and she had already recovered a long time ago. These days, she had resumed her work at home on research projects. When they were discussing, Aiden cried again. At this moment, Rosemary, Zeke, Brandon, and the others all surged forward wanting to hold the child. Bessy frowned and looked up at the aunt. "Is he hungry?" Seeing so many people come forward, Michael didn't join them and just glanced at the aunt too. She laughed. "No, the baby just likes to be held." Aiden was very clever and wouldn't cry or make trouble when sleeping with his parents. However, he would whine as soon as his parents left and had to be held by others. At this moment, Bessy and Michael only realized his behavior after the aunt's explanation. It turned out that the baby boy had been deliberately making trouble and had even made Marvin hold him for 4 consecutive hours. Bessy nodded and put the cup on the table. She stood and glanced at Marvin, who was holding Aiden. "Put him down." Marvin silently put the child in the cradle. Aiden pouted and cried again. At this time, Brandon, Zeke, Rosemary, and the others were so distressed that they immediately wanted to reach out and hold him. Bessy walked to the cradle. She lowered her eyes and said, "Shut up." The little baby choked pitifully and then stopped, staring at her with its beautiful eyes. Bessy looked down at the boy and couldn't help but massage her temples, feeling like all her patience had been spent on him. She turned her head and asked for the milk bottle from the servant before stuffing it directly into the boy's mouth. "Drink it." The boy's mouth bulged and he began to drink, his eyelashes trembling aggrievedly. At the side, Brandon, Zeke, and the others all felt so distressed that they couldn't breathe. "Please persuade Bessy to be gentler. This child is so young and will only be 1 month old tomorrow. She shouldn't be so strict with him." Brandon whispered to Michael, not far away. Michael glanced at Bessy with a hint of amusement flowing in his eyes. Upon hearing this, he shook his head slightly. "Don't spoil him too much. We can't keep giving in to him every time he cries. From today on, I'll spend a few hours a day educating him. He makes his mother suffer too much." He never expected that Zeke and Brandon, who had always been so self-disciplined, would also suffer defeat at the hands of Aiden. Brandon silently turned his gaze back to the little boy. "I'm sorry. Great Uncle can't help you." Episode 638. Associate Professor Watson. The next day, at the celebration, next door to the Clark family's manor, the big courtyard house repaired by Michael was where the celebration was being held. Early in the morning, Rosemary and Brandon dressed Aiden and left first. Bessy still had another subject at the laboratory and went over in the morning out of worry. She planned to go to the courtyard with Kara and the others after finishing this stage of the experiment. At 9 a.m., someone called her outside the laboratory. "Dean Miller, your mother is here." Bessy looked a little like Grace, who had also claimed to be Bessy's mother. The guard didn't dare to neglect her and had personally brought her in to see Bessy. Putting down her pen, Bessy looked up with a light expression. The glory in Grace's face had disappeared, replaced with unconcealed signs of old age instead. Seeing Bessy's expression, her breath stopped for a moment. Then she pinned her hair behind her ears and said, "Bessy, I heard that you're married now and even gave birth to a child recently. Why didn't you tell me? She was now far less beautiful than before, and the Perez and Smith families had also declined, leaving only Thomas, who was developing prosperously. After the fall, the circle around Grace was ever-changing, and she didn't know what had happened in Evanston. She only knew that the Miller family was getting bigger and bigger, and James was often seen on the news as well. What gnawed on Grace's heart was that if she hadn't divorced James back then and had brought Bessy along with her, wouldn't she have a share of this glory too? Glancing at the magnificent laboratory and hearing how the others respectfully called Bessy Dean Miller, even an ignorant person like her understood the weight that Bessy held. "Mrs. Smith, this is the last time I'll be speaking so calmly to you. I was kidnapped together with Anne at the age of 7, but you only paid Anne's ransom. In Chicago, you cut off all ties with me for the sake of her and the Smith family. When she stole my violin composition and the Violin Association wanted to expel me, you hid the truth for her. Later, when Gabriel attacked the Miller family, you once again abandoned us." Bessy said through gritted teeth, but her hands didn't stop moving. "You're my grandma's daughter, and that's the only reason why I didn't touch you when Anne and Gabriel reported our news." After finishing the experiment, she returned the instrument to its spot and looked up smiling. "Otherwise, why do you think you're still alive when so many people have fallen in Evanston?" Although she was smiling, her eyes were chilling. "If you still want to eat and live well, you better not come to me again." Grace staggered back and stared at her in horror. Yes, she and Anne were still alive, but it wasn't as good as before. Anne didn't pass an exam last semester and had been dropped out of Northwestern University. This was one of the reasons why she had come to Bessy. She walked out of the laboratory in despair. The sun was high up in the sky in February, but the wind was still cold. She stood at the gate in a daze. The sound of a car sounded not far away. Grace looked up vaguely. She saw a royal blue car. After being immersed in a wealthy family for a year, she recognized that it was a Maserati, a model she had never seen before. She watched as the driver's door opened and a woman came out. It was Andrea. Andrea wasn't as fragile and battered as before, and her legs were also much better. Compared to before, she even seemed 10 years younger. Staring in her direction, Grace was stunned and in disbelief. Beside her, the middle-aged woman in the communication room glanced at Grace and started gossiping. "Do you know Associate Professor Watson?" "Associate Professor Watson?" Grace uttered the unfamiliar word. "She's Dean Miller's aunt, Associate Professor Watson of Devil City's Research Institute," said the middle-aged woman mysteriously. Grace stared in Andrea's direction in a daze. President Flores, the principal of Northwestern University, was talking very politely to Andrea. The middle-aged woman gave full play to her gossip nature and said enviously, "Andrea is the daughter of the researcher Claudius. Her son also has the handwritten notes left by him, and it has become a key protection object of the country. Most importantly, she's Miss Miller's aunt. As you know, no one in Evanston dares to offend Miss Miller. She's a national treasure, a leader in the IT and physics field. As soon as the little crown prince was born, Associate Professor Watson quit her job in Devil City to take care of him. They all said that this person will be born. This family is really a winner in life, and she even turns out to be Miss Miller's aunt." "Hey, are you all right?" Grace clutched her chest, having received a huge blow. She had been reluctant and distasteful when Anne and Elise first came to Bessy for reconciliation. But now, watching all this and hearing the words of the woman beside her, she was left with regret and earnestness. Whimpering, she glanced at the woman next to her and could only shed tears. The words, "I'm her mother," choked in her throat, and she couldn't say anything. She had personally abandoned such a daughter time and time again. She was full of regrets, but the only thing she could do was sit weakly in front of the door and cry bitterly. She knew that after being calculative for most of her life, she was now left with absolutely nothing. Episode 639. Third place among terrorist organizations. At the West family. Pete just finished showering and changing clothes. Then he went to his bedroom to fetch the gift he had prepared and went to find Bessy and Michael. As soon as he left the room, he saw 3 people in the hall looking at him. They were Edward, Benson, and the person in charge of Devil City's Chemical Research Institute. Upon seeing him, the person in charge started frantically pouring out his grievances, then whined a little eagerly. "Mr. West, Deputy Watson wants to take a year off." Pete glanced at them and nodded politely. "Yes, she wants to take care of my little nephew." The person in charge originally thought he would hear some earth-shattering answer and was rather speechless to hear this. "I'll come along with you." Edward stood up and followed him. He knew it was a celebration for Bessy's baby today. After the incident, Pete had been sent to Evanston's hospital, and Edward's health had originally deteriorated to no return. But thanks to Bessy's experimental medicine sent to him by a freak combination of factors, he had held on until now. Although he had never seen Pete's cousin since he came to Evanston, he had already vaguely guessed her identity. After all, apart from the 4 major families in Evanston, no one could make the Marshall family so serious. Today, upon hearing about the celebration, Edward had prepared a special gift and rushed to Evanston. They walked out. The car Pete was driving today wasn't the one originally given by Michael, but a black Volkswagen that he had brought by himself later on. It was ordinary and didn't have anything special. Edward and the others followed him. The person in charge of the research institute turned to Edward and Benson. He lowered his voice and asked, "What's Deputy Watson thinking? Why isn't she staying in the research institute and has run back to raise a child instead?" The person in charge felt heartache after thinking about it. He had finally found the person from the Pharmaceutical Research Institute back then, but she had returned home after a year just to take care of a child. He originally thought that he would gain the approval of Edward and Benson, but unexpectedly, they both remained silent. Pete's car was already parked in front. He was about to make a last effort, but still swallowed his voice again. He would persuade Andrea when he met her later. Pete drove the car to the courtyard. The further he drove, the more the road looked different from other avenues in Evanston. The person in charge sat in the back seat with Benson and Edward. "Sir, don't you think there's something wrong with this path?" he whispered. Edward glanced at him, then fell silent. The car drove further and further in. The person in charge was silent now. Pete parked the car in the parking space outside. They got out of the car and the person in charge saw the wide bluestone road. He turned to Edward and said, "Sir, does Deputy Watson's niece live here?" Before he could finish his words, he happened to see the car parked next to Pete. It was also a black car. But compared to Pete's Volkswagen, this car had a unique shape, smooth lines, and reflected a faint halo in the sun. Compared to this car, Pete's car instantly turned into an ugly duckling. None of this was very important, however. The main point was, the person in charge rubbed his eyes and stared at the car's license plate. 0000000. He thought he had seen wrongly, rubbed his eyes again, and took a closer look. It was still a row of zeros. He turned to look at Pete stiffly. However, Pete looked down at his phone, his long drooping eyelashes casting a shadow under his eyes. He said in a cold, rigorous voice, "Let's go in first." He walked in front of Edward and directly entered the large courtyard opposite. Following behind them, the person in charge bowed his head and whispered to Benson, Deputy Watson's niece lives here?" It was also the first time that Benson was here. He had only been to the High Line before, but he nodded upon hearing this. "It should be." The person in charge was speechless. "Pete." Once they had entered, a voice called out from behind. Pete turned around to see Jared, as well as a young man in a tangerine leather jacket and ripped jeans. "Jared, Brother Dragon." Pete stopped and greeted them very politely. "Pete, why are you so serious?" Slag Dragon walked over on his flip-flops and patted him on the back. Then, he smiled and greeted Edward and the others without any seriousness. "Are you here to see my godson as well?" Jared faintly replied to him, "Don't flatter yourself. Who's your godson?" "What's the difference? If he's Clarissa's godson, he's my godson as well." Slag Dragon waved his hand casually. Then, he turned to Edward and the others again. "You know my godson, right? He'll inherit my mantle in the future. You don't look like locals. Where are you from?" "Oh, you're Pete's grandpa. My apologies." "Really? I also think my tangerine jacket is very handsome. My godson likes to catch this tangerine color, so I especially wore it for him. Later on, he'll only let me hold him." Slag Dragon chattered on incessantly. Jared glanced at him. "You'd better shut up." Slag Dragon turned sideways to him. "Why? Did I say something wrong? Pete, tell me. Are you like this at your country's round table too?" Jared was very curious. He really didn't want to admit that the great god Slag Dragon was such a chatterbox. Could the prime minister of their country be more talkative than him? Slag Dragon swayed and glared at him. "Don't gossip." They walked in while talking. They happened to bump into an old man. "Mr. Covington." The old man immediately greeted Jared, looking very cordial. "General Hale, hello." Jared stopped glaring at Slag Dragon. Slag Dragon went to find Aiden as soon as he came in. Leaning sideways, Pete glanced at Edward, his eyes cold and bright as starlight. "My mom and cousin are already inside. Let me take you in first." The person in charge looked away from General Hale and stared at the people drinking tea outside, feeling the tremendous pressure on his head. These people drinking tea here were frequent guests on the news. He hurriedly replied to Pete, "Let's go." His voice was shaking. Pete didn't notice it and took them in directly. Bessy and Andrea had just arrived. Aiden was placed in the cradle by Michael, and no one was allowed to hold him. Aiden stopped crying and stared at him with a pair of sparkling eyes. "Let me hold him for a while. It's been so long. He must be uncomfortable." Mr. Grint rubbed his hands, unable to bear it. Looking down at the little baby, Michael sneered. His eyebrows were clear, and he crossed his cold arms over his chest.
Then he'll just have to bear it. You'll spoil him.
If he was used to getting his way at such a young age and was influenced by this large group of lawbreakers around him, he would only be used to lawlessness in the future. The large group of people in the room was helpless.
Sister, brother-in-law, my grandpa is here.
Pete brought Edward in. Then, Pete greeted the big bosses in the room one by one.
Great-grandpa, Mr. Grint, Mr. Cree, Mr. Ken.
The two sides greeted one another. After coming in, the person in charge following Benson finally heaved a sigh of relief. The few people in the living room who frequently appeared on the news had scared him, but the people here were more normal. Edward handed Bessy the gift he had chosen, a safety lock he had begged for at the temple for half a year. Michael solemnly put it on the little boy. Xander also followed the momentum and took out a trap box, which looked a little old.
I didn't prepare any gifts.
The person in charge whispered to Benson.
How about I just give him an envelope?
He hadn't known it was a celebration for the baby today. Benson thought for a while and nodded.
Sure.
While the two were talking, Kenneth stood up. He wasn't from America and didn't know such etiquette. He directly took out his gun in his pocket and put it in the little boy's cradle.
There you go. He doesn't want it.
Upon seeing what was in the cradle, Daniel picked it up quickly and threw it back at Kenneth. Kenneth squinted.
Mr. Brown, this gift,
President Flores coughed.
It's also Mr. Ken's sincerity.
Although, it was a little bad to give a gun to a child. However, President Flores had gotten used to it these days. Daniel looked at Kenneth with a sneer.
Do you dare to tell him what you do?
President Flores and the others exchanged glances.
A terrorist organization.
President Flores murmured.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. You want him to take the third highest post? Dream on.
Daniel gently brushed off his sleeves. Episode 640. It could ruin Northwestern University's reputation. The two sang the same tune. Alexander, Terry, Jared, and the others in the hall looked at Kenneth gloomily, narrowing their eyes. Especially Alexander, who still intended on teaching Aiden in the future, even though Brandon hadn't agreed to it. Kenneth paused for a moment and then looked up.
No, I'm not.
He put the gift back into his pocket and tried to explain himself.
I just took the wrong thing.
Folding his arms, Daniel showed him no mercy.
You took such an enormous gift by mistake. Why hasn't your organization been cut down already?
Kenneth was speechless. He had nothing else to say. Daniel naturally knew Kenneth's intentions. He wanted to snatch Aiden to be their third most powerful man. Both Alexander and Kobe of the Underground Alliance would have to give him face. Especially Matthew, whom Kenneth was so apprehensive about, would also have to become gentler. But Kenneth wasn't the only one with his plans for Aiden. From top to bottom in Evanston, the old guys in the Physics Institute were all betting on Aiden. It was just that these old guys didn't dare to be as bold as Jared and Mr. Grint, and only just secretly thought about it. Even Daniel wanted to abduct Aiden and take him to the World Health Institute. If Aiden wanted to study medicine, let alone Daniel, even the organization itself would put aside everything at hand to take time to train the little cub. It was a pity that everyone had such intentions, but no one made a single move now, and could only wait for him to get older. With Kenneth's intention, Daniel would never agree to it. This side of Evanston was a treasured land of feng shui.
Let's go.
Glancing at her watch, Rosemary directly walked over to pick Aiden up.
Can I take him out now?
She raised her chin and glanced at Michael. Michael knew that educating the little boy couldn't be done overnight, so he nodded to her. The Clark family, the Miller family, and several older generations from the Physics Research Institute were all waiting to see Aiden. Upon seeing Rosemary heading out, the group of people behind also followed in a straight line. Only Benson was left. Because the West family was present, Andrea didn't immediately go out with Rosemary, but waited until the people were almost gone before she stopped in front of Edward and the others. Edward had experienced a lot in his lifetime and concealed his inner shock from coming here for the first time. He turned to her and said,
"The person in charge of the Research Institute is looking for you."
Andrea nodded and glanced at the person in charge of the Chemistry Research Institute. Surprised. "Are you looking for me?" The person in charge seemed to be in a daze and took about 10 seconds to react. He immediately put his hand behind him, as if he was a rabbit who had been stepped on.
No, not at all."
Finding his reaction a little strange, Andrea glanced at him, but didn't say anything else. She took Edward to the lobby. The person in charge and Benson followed behind them. After Andrea left the house, Benson turned to the person in charge.
"Weren't you going to ask her about the Research Institute?"
The person in charge silently looked up, speechless. He originally thought that it was too wasteful for a person like Andrea to leave her job and raise a child, so he had followed Edward here in order to persuade her to return. But now... He was speechless, especially after seeing the scene just now. How would he dare to say it? Those present today were familiar friends of the Clark and Miller families. The renewal of Evanston in the past 2 years had been too drastic, and other than the wedding of Bessy and Michael, it hadn't been this lively for a long time. So this incident had really injected new life into Evanston. Bessy was a magnet in the Physics Institute, while Michael was a magnet in the medical school, and both of them were even powerful figures in Austria. It was only natural for these people to be so focused on their child.
"Scarlett, do you want to hold him?"
At the sight of Scarlett quietly following Luke, Rosemary rarely softened her brows and looked towards her. She had heard about Scarlett from Patrick, especially her recent restoration in the Hall of Fame. Scarlett wore glasses with a large frame, and upon hearing this, she looked up with more expression on her face.
"Try it."
Rosemary walked over and carefully taught her how to hold the child. She lowered her head and cooed to Aiden.
"This is your Aunt Scarlett. She's your mother's childhood friend."
As if because of these words, Aiden never cried. Looking down at the child, Scarlett's heart softened terribly, and she smiled softly. The child was only a month old and was still very small. Scarlett held him for a while before returning him to Rosemary. After thinking about it, she took off a pendant on her neck and handed it to him. "This was my brother's." Looking at the little boy's face, Scarlett's eyes shone a little brighter. Rosemary knew that this jade pendant must be very important to her. She looked up and was about to speak when Scarlett pushed her glasses and looked down at the time on her watch. "I have to rush back. I still have something to do." No matter what, Scarlett only focused on her studies. Especially in the past few years, she had become even more silent than before, and even Luke rarely saw her smile. She was probably only truly happy today and during Bessy's wedding. Rosemary watched her go out and wanted to say something, but Luke stopped her. Wearing a white shirt and a black windbreaker draped over his wrist, he nodded slightly at her.
"Take it. She really likes Aiden."
He glanced at Aiden and his eyes softened.
"Can I hold him?"
"Of course." Rosemary handed the child to him. As for those from the Physics Institute, they just had to line up at the back. Everyone knew that these 3 friends who had grown up with her were more important to her than 129 and the Physics Institute. Thus, when Scarlett and Luke jumped in line, no one dared to say anything. It wasn't easy to hail a taxi at the Clark family's area, and she had to walk out for 10 minutes before she could get a taxi. Scarlett didn't let Marvin send her off. Luke had left a car for her, but she didn't drive it either. She slowly walked outside with her brows lowered. Because of the restricted traffic here, there were special guards and passerbys. The rapid sound of her phone ringing interrupted her thoughts. She wrapped her coat around her and answered the phone. The counselor told her to return quickly. Quickening her pace, she walked to the road and hailed a taxi. After arriving at school, she directly went to the counselor's room. Scarlett's counselor was a woman in her 30s who wore glasses and looked rather gentle. She had been taking great care of Scarlett during the latter's college days. "Counselor, you want to promote the posters?" Scarlett pushed up her glasses and asked seriously. In her freshman year, the counselor happened to know that Scarlett was a good artist, and had asked her to help draw some posters for remuneration. Aware that she was an orphan and was working at the same time, the counselor had subconsciously helped her. "That's not important. I've sent you the internship list of the investigation department." The counselor put down the mouse and looked up at her. Near graduation, everyone's whereabouts were a problem. Some people were busy taking the postgraduate entrance examination. Some had already found a company the year before, while some hadn't passed the examination and were looking for a job. Not everyone could enter the investigation department. This year, the counselor had applied for Scarlett after the 2 lists of Northwestern University were handed down. It wasn't just because she took care of Scarlett, but more importantly, Scarlett worked hard and was very practical too. Once, when Scarlett didn't come to class for 2 consecutive weeks, Professor Flores from the Physics Institute had even come to apply for leave for her. After weighing various pros and cons, the counselor had given her the only placing and had declared the reasons to her superiors. Scarlett was stunned for a moment. "Thank you, counselor." Her voice was the same as usual. She didn't sound surprised. The counselor felt puzzled and glanced at her. "Work hard in the investigation department. It's best if you can stay. Of course, people who are with you will be there for their internships, but there's no need to feel too much pressure." Scarlett left. The assistant teacher of the counselor said, "Why did you approve a freshman this year? It's hopeless for a freshman to successfully stay in the investigation department." The investigation department only recruited 5 interns each year, including doctoral students from abroad and from America. Although it was said to be 5 interns, in actuality, it was also a contest between the various big universities. In previous years, Northwestern University's law school had even sent their doctoral students for internships. Even so, they had failed to stay. It was the investigation department, after all. The students of Northwestern University didn't have many posts there. Thus, the dean of the law school was very careful in choosing the placing every year. This year was extremely random, however, and they had picked a fresh graduate to go. The assistant professor admitted that Scarlett was outstanding, but she wasn't as good as the doctoral students in other universities. The key point was that the dean of the law school actually dared to approve it. He was afraid that it would only destroy Northwestern University's good reputation.